Sure.
Got- We got some people trickling in. I just messaged Dr. Laffoon. She said she'll be coming in. But I think we just get started if you guys are cool with it.
Sure.
Great.
Okay, cool. First of all, if you're in here, you probably submitted your ERS applications at some time over the past week, and it's probably been shipped out to PDs already. So big congrats to everyone who has done that. And for those who are getting the early jump, good luck for next year. We wanted to put this session together a little bit just because, you know, there's a lot of hype about applications and stuff. And I think a big understatement is like once you're done applications, the job's not kind of done. And there's still a big process to go with interviews and kind of understanding the process with interviews is really important and something that's not really talked about. So we wanted to kind of get something going for that. So we threw together this quick webinar. So we have three speakers that we are super lucky to have with us that I'll really quickly introduce. First of all, Dr. Gianna Valenti. She's a Peds Heme Fellow at Children's Hospital of Michigan. She's also one of my mentors. She's absolutely amazing. And so I'm super stoked for you guys to kind of hear from her mentorship today. Dr. Laffoon, kind of dealing with a bit of a crisis, but she is joining in a sec here. She just finished her fellowship in cosmetic surgery, and she's a fully attending cosmetic surgeon out in Nashville. And I'll actually be joining her with Farouk for an elective in like a few weeks here. And then finally, Dr. Jones, Shishona, a lot of you guys probably recognize her because she just matched this past season and she was part of our student government. So a big shout out to her for joining as well. So thank you all. And yeah, I'll kind of turn it over. It's going to be very open floor, like you guys can ask questions, but we kind of have a few sections we want to go through. But we'll kind of start by kind of hearing from their personal experiences from their interviews. So yeah, Gianna, Shishona, the floor is y'all's. There's some guiding questions to kind of keep you guys focused on a specific point, but I'll let you guys take the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me. I am a Trinity graduate back in 2017, so it has been some time. So I think it's going to be great so we get Shoshona's experience, especially now in the era of virtual interviews. So I think we'll have some different, but I think good experience to share with both of you. So would you like to start it off by sharing your experience?
Hi, everyone. Good night. Thank you again, Roche, SJ, for being here. Gianna, it's so lovely to see you. I remember when I was in term five, you were actually, you were one of our lecturers as well. So it's like so full circle to see you again now, and you were teaching us all the Hemon stuff. So it's been great. Yes, recent graduate, April, some fresh, literally new kid on the block. Very excited to be here tonight. Very passionate about medical education, ERAS, getting into residency, doing all the things, and just like what Dr. Valenti said, yes, I can definitely share some insight as I just went through this process. So, number one, congratulations to all of you guys for getting your application in. That's a big step. I know you've been grinding hard, stressing, going through all the ebbs and flows of what a medical student goes through. I was just recently in your shoes, so I sympathize. I understand. But actually, to kind of delve into like residency interviews. So, number one, please stay near your emails, your phones. Make sure you have a way of being able to receive emails because interviews are trickling in. Like students have already been receiving interviews, messaging me, letting me know, my gosh, I can't believe I have an interview. I said, yeah, that happened to me last year. I actually received my first interview the next day. And I know colleagues of mine who received theirs the same day. So it's not weird at all. For me, the residency interview is a major, I think, yes, the application is important. Of course, everybody can see on paper, but I think that opportunity, especially post-COVID, for everyone to be able to kind of see you, see your personality, kind of interact with you, pick your brain, and kind of have that conversation with you where it's formal but still informal at the same time. And I don't want it to anyone to forget that just as much as they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them as well. You want to make sure that you find the right place for you. Nowhere is perfect, but somewhere where you want to be, where you know you're going to thrive, where you know you're going to do well. And I think that's very important. Also adding to that, just making sure you stay true to yourself. I think that's so important. Sometimes you try to put on this script, and then when it comes out, you just seem so robotic, so stiff. You don't express no facial expressions. I can even give you a personal experience. I remember I was interviewing for family, and we're a lot about like personality and being personable, especially as a primary care provider. And I remember in one of my breakout interviews, one of the attendings actually said to me, Shishona, thank you so much for this morning. And I was like a little taken aback. I was like, what did I do? She's like, out of everyone on the panel who was interviewing that day, you were the only one who I noticed actually making the facial expressions, nodding in agreement, doing the things. And she said that meant a lot. So simple things like that, they are paying attention to you from the moment you're on that screen. So I think that's so important to just be natural, but of course not be informal as well.
I think that's a great point. And, I think my takeaway really from it is your application is really your foot in the door, and your interview is really your chance to kind of sell yourself as well as interview the program to see if it's a good fit. I think the interviews are all about trying to figure out what's a good fit for you, just as much as the programs are trying to figure out what's a good fit for them. And I think, especially now being on the other sides of things and participating in residency interviews, I think the culture of a program is really important. And I think it's probably a little bit harder, and we all try our best now that everything is virtual. But I feel like if you can truly assess that through your interviews, whether it's in person or not, I think that that's going to be the best way for you to make a judgment. Because a lot of the stuff is really kind of the same. Like everyone has the same, if I'm in pediatrics. So if you're applying to pediatrics, everyone has the same GME requirements. There may be some small differences here or there, and those are things you can fit out, but really who you work with matters so much. And so I think what was really helpful to me was to like pay attention about like my interview, my interactions with the actual residents. Do they seem happy? Do they seem miserable? I think that those things like really, really do go a long way. And so those are things to pay attention to. But I agree. I think, your applications has gotten you this far, and you really now the interview needs to take you that final step over, kind of like over the line to get that spot. Um, and so I think, guess that kind of talks about how crucial the interview portion is. And then I think about ways to set yourself apart. I think Shoshana really hit the nail on the head. You have to just be true to yourself and really be genuine. And I think it is so easy to tell who is not being genuine in these situations because she's right. It comes off as kind of rehearsed, not robotic. You're not giving really, and I think as like physicians, we can like read people very well too. And after you do so many of these, that gets easier and easier. So I think that that is fantastic advice.
Sweet. Yeah, me personally being a fourth year student, I'm on my third rotation right now, and every resident I've been with, that's the number one tip I've heard is remember that you're also interviewing them and you're not the one being interviewed. So that's good to hear that that's a bit of a consensus. So just like kind of moving on to like what preparation did you guys do before interviews when it came to like researching programs, like, preparing how you're going to portray your story and like, did you guys do mock interviews with friends or anything like that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, for me, I know I'm somebody who's type A. As most of us, of course, all of us, being in medicine, you have some form of type A. And for me, I felt like it was important. Number one, definitely, you need to research the program, and this doesn't even apply to necessary residency, but anything in life. You need to vet. You need to be able to research. You need to be able to understand what are you applying for? What are you potentially signing up for? Especially because of the match process, where based on the algorithm, you get matched and you don't want to get matched somewhere and you're like, wait, I didn't even know this took place, this happened. And that's really horrible. And especially when you're going to be in residency for a minimum of 3 years, depending on specialty. I think it's important to research the programs and just know, mission, like what's their mission, their values, seeing the residents, like Dr. Valenti said, like knowing the residents and where they're from, little, hobbies, things that they do for wellness. I think that's a big thing, especially in the just on the 17th was National Physician Suicide Awareness, and that is something that's very real. in residency. Actually, I was just in didactics today and learned two physicians within like our IU community actually passed away recently due to suicide, and it's unfortunate. So these are like questions that you need to be like to be able to research the program and understand what's their wellness, in terms of like academics, what's their curriculum like, what's faculty in terms of research, do they have fellowships, where do residents go after, those things are important as well. Practice and like mock interviews. For myself, last year I was very fortunate. The FM residents actually at Houston actually held mock interviews, and I actually participated in a session, and I was very grateful that I did. I'm not sure if that's happening again this year. I hope it is. It was definitely helpful. If so, definitely please take part of that opportunity. And I think for me, it gave me the opportunity to kind of get those jitters because we're so like nervous and we want to be perfect, we want to do well. And I think that kind of helped me kind of take that off, kind of get a simulation of what, the questions that they ask. And it is, some questions it could be like, oh, so what do you think about the state of healthcare right now? Or what do you think, what's our most, one of our biggest issues in healthcare right now? I remember that was one of the questions I got on my interview. And, it's okay to like pause, take a moment and think about it. Don't feel like you just have to rush into every question. Or if you're not sure of the question, feel free to, ask for clarification. That's always important as well, instead of just rambling on and then you kind of miss the point and then you look like you're not paying attention. So little things like that as well. In terms of preparing and sharing like personal stories, I think it's always important to make sure, yes, definitely have a personal story, but the way in which you're utilizing it to kind of highlight certain characteristics about you. So like for myself, like I remember I spoke about being on my general surgery rotation. I was not interested in general surgery per se, but having to deal with a situation of like long hours or a difficult patient or a difficult case, and being able to turn that into a situation where it showed resilience, hard work, perseverance, ability to accept constructive criticism. I think that's one of the biggest things, especially preparing, like being a medical student, but also going into residency where you're basically back at square one. So you're learning how to practice medicine. So you're going to be critiqued a lot, and having to be okay with that and recognizing, okay, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to learn. And that's a lot what programs are also looking for in your responses as well. Are you somebody that is combative, or are you someone that's teachable? Residency is about molding, shaping, just like medical school, just like you were a pre-med student. But particularly in residency, you're preparing, at least in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be out in the world as an attending, and they need to be able to have individuals in their program who have a great spirit, great energy. They know they want to work hard. They know it's going to be hard. They have a great attitude, but they're teachable. And I think that's a big thing, that especially in residency, and I see even in my program as well, that being able to criticize and teach and being able to receive feedback is very important. So yeah, that's some of my advice there, but I could go on more, but just a little tidbit there.
I think that's excellent. I think these are all fantastic points. Just one additional thing I'll probably add to that is I think in researching programs, I think it's really important to use that to help you to develop what type of questions you want to ask when you're in your interview, because they're literally everyone will ask you what type of questions you have because they want to make sure that you are informed to make this important decision about their program as well. And I feel like sorry, not patients, when applicants come in and it's very obvious when they either don't have questions or their questions are like not reflective of like appropriate research. Where if you're asking me something that was either provided to you already or easily found on the internet, I think that's pretty obvious. But what you can do is use that information to then generate your questions. I see your program actually has a lot of residents that go into X, Y, and Z fellowship. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think that is? Do you feel like you have a strong, is it because there's a strong background in this? And I feel like those things really do help you develop that. And if you don't have questions, it also looks like you're uninterested. And so I think that is something important to kind of take away. It's okay to ask, this is a little different than we're talking about, but on the topic of having questions, it's okay to ask different interviewers the same question. But at least have some things prepared, and things may come up throughout the interview, but at least if you have that prepared, you're not like scrambling at the last second to think about it. But I think everything that you said was right on point.
Thank
One
you.
thing
And I
to
agree, yes.
One thing to add to that, and this is something I've kind of heard, and Shishona kind of touched on it a bit, but I've also heard like they do ask you questions on like modern trends on like things specific to your specialty. So like how important is doing research in that, just like in general?
That's a great question. I think knowing like obviously like hot topics in your particular specialty interest, I think most people who are like applying to certain areas are doing, X amount of electives. And so I think most of these, so like having opinions and at least having like a baseline understanding is important, I feel like.
Cool. Okay, sweet. Thank you. And then moving on to actual interview day, can you guys tell us a little bit more about like what interview day is like? And I know we got kind of two different sides of it. I know Shoshona, yours was all virtual, and Gianna, yours was mostly not. So curious to see how kind of interview day act like the process of it goes.
So for myself, yes, all my interviews were virtual. I know for some it might think like, oh, should I do virtual? Should I do in person? And I think it all depends. I think also given the nature of like COVID and everything was happening as well. Also budgeting because it's something that you actually have to be able to like fly out. You have to have the time. You're thinking about your elective, so you're still trying to get that final learning before you're into residency, but also trying to balance that. So I was grateful for the virtual interviews because you were able to basically schedule them in at whatever time worked for you. I think also making sure, and of course your attendings are aware like match season is happening, so you have that relationship. Just let them know. I have an interview going on that day, and I can remember for myself, they've been very gracious. They were like, yeah, you could take my office, or if you need to take the half day and kind of get yourself together, or what, don't come, like focus on that. I really want you to focus on that. So I think also making sure to give them that respect as well, especially for those of you who are currently on your electives and fourth year. I think also communicating that as well. For interview day for me, I feel like it ranges honestly in terms of timing, uh, going anywhere from maybe 2 hours to like almost like an 8 to 5, 8 to 4 kind of situation. And it could have where like introduction, then you'll meet the like faculty, then you'll meet the residents, and then you'll kind of have breakout sessions. I remember some even had like a writing portion where they just kind of wanted to see how you, in terms of how your communication style. So it depends, and it's, I would say, specialty specific and also program specific as well. In terms of first impression, number one, arriving on time. That makes such a major difference. I
Mhm.
think it's one of those things that are underrated. And I can imagine sometimes right now you're thinking like, oh, like my attending showing up for rounds like 15 minutes, 20 minutes after they said, to be here. But honestly, you probably didn't realize they probably got an emergent call, had to triage, do all the damage control and stabilize before they could even come to the rounds. So, trying to keep those things in mind, but especially when you're trying to get your foot in the door, like Dr. Valenti was saying, arriving on time, making sure in terms of your background, that's a key factor as well. All of those aesthetic things that, because especially you're on a virtual interview, you don't want your background, they can see your laundry from the past week back there. You're not really, that doesn't really help as well. I know some people wonder, like, do I get a background? Do I blur? And it all depends. For most of my interviews, I was able to blur my screen, or I tried to find a neutral wall. So I rotated my desk to have a wall so that I look neutral, smooth, professional, having appropriate lighting. That's so key. I know Dr. Zubra has probably hammered this about the lighting. That makes such a big difference because they need to be able to see your face, see your expressions, and be able to accurately say, oh, yeah, was that a smile or a frown? I couldn't tell because the lighting was distorting that. In terms of asking or receiving tough questions, I remember that question about like healthcare, like how I previously mentioned. it was something that I never really thought of, but I remember when the question was asked and I kind of like took a moment, thought about it, and then like I gave my answer. I remember actually distinctly this question in particular, and I gave an answer about specialization. I said, as a future primary care physician, and thinking about like, a lot of specialization happening, but still patients are still not getting to see primary care. Everything is that us we're having to refer, and that can lead to patients getting lost in the system. And that's unfortunate when we're still dealing with chronic conditions like hypertension, like diabetes, that are still getting diagnosed on a daily. So little questions like that, and you're like, wow. And I remember even the interview, he was like, yeah, that's very true. So being able, like Dr. Valenti said, to know hot topics within your specialty is definitely important as well. And it'll also make you look like you're aware of what's happening because it's going to affect you, even though you're not an attending. These things are still affecting you because you have a license, you are practicing. So these are things that you need to be aware of as well because you will be seeing patients on a daily basis. In terms of asking insightful questions during interviews, um, I think more so related to like what is happening in the program. Like, for example, I remember my program that I'm actually at right now here in Indiana. I remember they recently changed over PDs and asking about what the goals are for the PD, or like what are your goals for the residency right now, or what are you currently working on? Those kinds of insightful questions are important because it helps you think about you're placing yourself in the program, you're thinking about how this could affect you as a resident and also for the future, and whether this is the type of culture or a program that you want to be a part of. So I think that's also important as well. And just being genuine and true and making sure it's not a question that could be looked up on the website or on their Instagram, things like of that nature. Just to also add on actually before finishing this as well, with the virtual interviews, those who have social media, particularly Instagram programs, put a lot of their information on like their stories, on their like posts. So definitely perusing that, kind of getting to see a day in the life of what the program does on a day to day is also helpful to kind of guide your questions as well. Like, oh, I noticed you guys did this activity. Like, what is that like? That was a question that you would ask to the resident, not necessarily to your PD. So knowing how to tail that depending on who you're interviewing with is important as well.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And one additional thing, I think just my days looked I would say a little different. All of mine were in person, and I agree. I feel like the era of Zoom has really made it possible to do a lot more. So I actually remember having to cancel interviews because it just like was not possible to do, you know, that many or fly to that many places. And it really was a large financial burden. So I feel like having that option is actually very, very nice. For ours, I would say most of the time they were like a day, like 8 to 4, maybe 8 to like 3. And we usually would like show up, there would be breakfast. You would kind of like casually meet people, and then you would break off into individual interviews. And then there was always a time for you to like spend time with the residents, usually either over lunch or at like a group interview, things like that. Um, and then we would take a tour, which I would assume now would be probably a video, because I remember making one of those when I was in residency during COVID. So, definitely different. And I still think you can glean a lot from virtual interviews, while it being a much more practical way to kind of go through the process. So I think definitely looked a little different. I'm not sure. Are there options to do them in person, or is it all virtual? I'm actually not even
Yeah,
100.
so I think the consensus for this year from a lot of the PDs that I've heard from is that it's going to be mostly virtual. It would be very lucky if you got some in person, but it seems like it's going to be majority
Virtual.
video or Zoom.
And I think there are a lot of benefits to that. So if you have the option and you choose virtual, like that would not change the program's opinion or anything like that. So don't feel like that would go into the decision. Um, I think when we talk about answering questions effectively, this all and first impressions, like this all kind of goes in addition to what's already been said, goes into practicing, like practicing the different interview questions, being prepared to have questions to ask and insightful questions to ask. And then I think just kind of talking on the time when you potentially could have a tough or unexpected question during an interview, because this definitely happened to me and I'm sure will happen. You can practice, and someone may ask you something and you're like, wow, I've never actually thought of that. And I think in those moments, like we said previously, it's okay to just take a minute. And I always say that's a really good question to like buy myself a little bit of time, and then answer it. And I think there's actually a question in the chat already too about accolades or experiences within college. I think that those are totally appropriate to bring up. I think really anything throughout your life that affected you in that particular circumstance, if it relates to that question, is appropriate to use. For example, I remember during my interview at the program that I matched at, which was my first choice, they had asked me a question about like failure and how I kind of overcame that. And for some reason, the only thing I could think about was like a time in middle school. And so that's what I went with. And my program director was like, that was actually she told me that was a fantastic question. And later on, like when I matched there later, they were like, that's something that like really stuck out to us. And so I think really using your life experiences, no matter what point in your life that it is, if it relates to the question, it's totally appropriate. And I think using your college experiences is also totally appropriate because it just shows that you had this interest early on and you've been dedicated to this process for a long period of time. If you're talking about things you did in college or your college experiences. So I think that those are totally appropriate to use or bring up in the appropriate situations.
Would you feel comfortable talking about your third grade failure experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I felt like it was kind of silly at the time when I was like talking about it, but in middle school, I actually was I think in fourth grade. I had been on the cheerleading team throughout middle school, and my friends were always like one tier above me. So like I was on like the second JV team, and they were all on the first one, and then they were all on varsity. Um, and then I was finally had to make varsity, or like you didn't make the team, and I didn't make the team. And so instead of being like, oh, I'm just not going to cheer anymore, I basically, as like a fourth grader, went home and I basically didn't have like a particular skill. And so I went home and did that every day for an entire season and showed back up the next year and tried out again. And I feel like that just like shows resilience. And that was like the best example I could think of in the moment. And then I went on to have a very successful career, cheerleading all through college. And so I think just knowing that like those are experiences that you can use, even though it has nothing to do with medicine, but talks to your personal character, even at a young age, I think was something clearly memorable for them, and is okay to use those type of situations. I'm not sure if that's applicable to everyone, but that was my particular experience.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to use that story for mine, but that's sweet. Thank you. And then one thing I've also heard, and maybe Shoshana, you can confirm, is for virtual interviews, like even when you're just in like waiting rooms with other applicants, like there is like a secretary or someone there who is like kind of like watching you and keeping eyes on you and like maybe writing stuff down and maybe keeping track of how you engage with people.
Yeah. And it would be more so like the program coordinator. So that's usually who is the one that's guiding the
Okay.
interview. So they're the ones that are going to like introduce themselves, welcome you to the program. It could be between them and the PD who kind of gives you an introduction into the interview and lay out the itinerary for the day. What
Okay.
I say is like in moments where you're either having a break between interviews, especially for the virtuals where they're like, oh, we'll take a 5 minute break. I recommend they allow you to take a bathroom break, mute yourself, and take off your video. Those two key steps are so crucial. I think I had one interview where they didn't say anything wrong, but you could hear like they weren't muted. So little things like that could easily just ruin or even, tarnish things because you didn't mute yourself or remove your video if you're stepping away from your computer, and just making sure you keep your sound on just in case they're making announcements saying, okay, we're going to be returning back in a minute. Get ready to come back. and so forth. So, and I don't think they're necessarily just taking notes. They're there to answer questions in between, just kind of help keep the itinerary, keep the schedule going and kind of help, lighten the mood because everybody's all like tense. And so that's why these mock interviews help, because when you get those jitters out, you're able to go in, rock it, you're cool, you're making facial, you look normal.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
don't look stiff. So that
for
that
sure.
that's how that goes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And
Good
it
to know.
functions very similarly when we do our fellowship interviews. And I will say, like, at least for my experience, like our program coordinator will like come out of interviews and be like, I didn't really like that person, or like, I thought they were great. So even using that like little bit of time to just have like small chit chat, like be engaging, or if you're gonna step away, I agree, turn off your video, put yourself on mute and be like, okay, great, thanks for the break. I'm gonna like run and grab a snack. And like that's totally normal. And we expect you to do those things too. But sometimes if you're just like sitting there, I think it's an additional opportunity to just kind of be like, so how's your day going? And it's like nothing of importance, but I feel like those little things just show that you're personable and that you're like easy to work with. And you have
Mm,
a personality that's works well with others. So I think that that also can go a long way.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And I just noticed a question in the chat about being pimped during interviews, or are they judging your cat? I don't necessarily think it's like being pimped, like how they're asking factual. And I'm not sure for other specialties, but I know like for myself, Dr. Valenti can attest to hers, but I think it's more so about trying to understand your personality, everything that they see. They have all the factual, like they already have your application. So you don't need to regurgitate the application. They just want to see, okay, can you gel with other people? Are you kind? Are you able to, to receive feedback and kind of see your personality? And, it's all about culture. Like these are people you're going to be in the hospital and working with at least, 80, sometimes 90 hours a week. So they just want to be able to see, okay, what type of person is this? Someone when things are going haywire. This is somebody who I would want by my side in my residency program. It's things like that. It's not necessary for all those fun, great moments, of course, but those tough moments when you're stressed, when your phone is going off and you're getting all these text messages about this patient. Who are the people that you would want to be around? So that's why the interview process is so critical.
I agree. Again, it's like all about that fit. Um, in pediatrics, no one is pimping you. But I, again, cannot speak for other specialties. And I think I like have heard that there may be some that like, I don't know, maybe I think someone was saying, like in their surgery, that were asked questions about certain things. So I feel maybe worthwhile talking to someone within your area that you're applying to see if that happens. But definitely if you're applying to pediatrics, that's not happening. And if it is, don't go there.
Cool, good to know for me. Okay, so after, like, what happens after the interview? Like, do you guys send thank you notes, thank you emails? I've heard letter of intent slash emails of intent like thrown around. Can you guys kind of explain how you guys like facilitated the relationship after your interviews were done?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. This is, I think, just as important because the interview period is a very long time. And so if you interview somewhere early on in the season, you're like, I want them to remember me. So, and I think it's just good etiquette and shows that like you're thoughtful. You took the time to say thank you. I think thank you notes or thank you emails, either ones are appropriate. If it's a program you really, really like, I think like handwritten notes definitely go a long way. They just take much longer to get there. So I think either
Mhm.
one is totally appropriate.
Right.
And I think they're important to send, especially if you're truly interested about a place. I think letters or emails of intent, I think towards the end of the season, if it's truly, truly a place that you are interested and plan on ranking highly, I would recommend emailing them and telling them that, saying like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I interviewed back in whenever, and, closing out the interview season, I just continue to think about my experience at whatever institution and just want to let you know that I plan on ranking you highly. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in the whatever, July. And I think that that is totally appropriate. Expect no response because I think most of the time they're really not allowed to tell you if they're planning on ranking you highly. Some people may not abide by that, but technically they're not supposed to. Some people will just respond and say, thank you, we appreciate it. Like, we enjoyed your interview too. And like, we're excited to see where this process takes us. But I feel like I wouldn't send that to every program, but I think if you have like a top two, top one, maybe stretch it to top three. But I think if you're going to tell them you're ranking them highly, like you should be ranking them highly. Um, I think reflecting on the interview immediately post is super, super important because I think how you feel when you walk out of there or after you have your virtual interview is also really important. Because again, it's all about the connections with the people, the fit, and like these are the people you have to work with in high stakes, high stress environment for the next 3 years. So for me, I had actually had like a full spreadsheet. I'm sure as most of us similarly. And you're writing down all these things, you're taking that, but I really took time to reflect on like how I felt after the interview because I felt like that really was important. And then those things for me at least helped me kind of teeter between my rank lists. Like, I walked out of there being like, this was the best program ever. And even though I'm ranking, like maybe that bumps them up to 3 versus 4 for other reasons, but it can just kind of help you fluctuate in between. So I feel like those are important things to reflect after and write that down. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, no, Dr. Valenti, you covered that basically. I know for me as well, especially on the virtual side of things. Yes, I agree. The thank you notes or thank you emails, I can personally tell you, I did not handwrite any because it
Neither.
would have taken too much time. I was in the middle of electives. I was on SGA. Like yeah. So it was a lot, but. Definitely, I would say sending like a thank you email at least within 2 days of the interview. You don't want to wait till 2 weeks and you didn't even remember you. Have already interviewed at least 10 other people after you are ready. So I think timing is also important as well. Also making sure your email is not generic. That's another thing
Mhm.
too, because you can get into that monotonous, oh, copy paste, da da da. Hi, dear Dr. Smith. Like you would be surprised. Like, remember, this is a program, multiple people have emailed you. They are going to be sitting and having roundtable about applicants, and they are going to be sharing information like, wow, I got this email from this kid, John, and oh, he said the same thing to you too? That's not reflecting well. And I think to help with that, and I know feel free to use this strategy. So I had something like this notebook, like this little 5-star notebook. And I remember I had it next to myself. So I had my little station, my water, my application on the side of me so that any questions I was able to refer. And then I had the notebook. And what I literally did, I wrote the name of the program who I was interviewing with. And between those breakout sessions, after our discussion, I literally jotted a few words, a few notes. And why I say that is as you're going through the interview process, it's very stressful, very exhausting, especially depending on how long your interview was. I remember I had an interview, I was up from 7 and I didn't finish till 5 and having to take breaks in between. So it's easy to forget. Things start to gel together. You don't remember. So it's very helpful to have a little notepad where you could write the name of the interview and write little notes. And those notes actually come in handy because now when you go to craft your email or to write your note, you're able to say, hi, Dr. Smith. It was so great to interview. Thank you for having the time. When our discussion today about changes in healthcare and these new interventions, it was great. I look forward to hearing from you again soon. Sincerely, John. And that 2 or 3 sentences of that detailed makes such a big difference because one, you're more likely to get a response like, hey, John, thank you. That was a great conversation. I look forward to hearing from you soon. So those things matter as well. So being as specific as possible, keeping yourself organized. And then it also, with those notes, help you as well for ranking programs. And I also recommend as you do your interview, begin to rank your programs. The interview season has kicked off and it goes basically up until at least a week before your rank list is due. And if you're interviewed at least 20 programs, it is easy to get lost and not remember key details that you need to make a major decision like this in your life. Like once you're matched, you are matched. So you want to be able to take the factors and take those, what you can control, you want to be able to control that. So is it that if you came out of that interview and you're like, yeah, the energy was off. I need to put them at a 5. oh, this was a great program. They need to be my number one, or they need to be my number two. And to piggyback off of what was already said in terms of that letter of intent, email of intent, I will say I did one letter of intent, and that was from my number one. And the strategy behind that is for me is that programs do talk. PDs are well aware of each other, especially within the same specialty. So if you're telling Indiana, I'm ranking you number one, you're telling Pittsburgh, I'm ranking you number, you're telling Rhode Island, that's not good, especially they're anticipating you are also going to be ranking them, and that is something that you want to make sure that you're being honest and you're being truthful. Yes, you'll send the letter of intent, you may not hear back for just neutrality purposes and the nature of interview season, which is understandable. They don't want you to think that they have you leaning one way or the other. Perfectly understandable, so do not be alarmed if that happens. If they send you an email saying thank you, don't necessarily read too much into it. They're just probably being kind in that regard and just say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll acknowledge his email. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of reflecting, once again, reflection is so important. That's why writing those notes is so key. I think also another thing that was helpful for me prior to submitting my rank list, I actually like spoke with two of my best friends, also in medical school and also in medicine, who are not going through the process, but an outsider. And I literally went through every program. I remember I ranked 17 programs. I had 17 interviews, ranked 17 programs, and I spoke about, we literally sat there for 3 hours and I went through each one by one. And I spoke about how I felt and, did everything. And they literally like said, oh, Shishona, your expression, you lit up when you spoke about that program. I think, yeah, that's an appropriate spot. Or, yeah, you didn't really speak too highly. You didn't really say much about them. Like, how do you feel about that? So they were also helping me play devil's advocate. And that also helped me in terms of how I ranked my programs as well. So making sure that you have accountability partners, friends, those in and outside of medicine who can help you in this process is also great as well in terms of ranking programs. And it's okay, like if you feel like this is a program I absolutely could not see myself in, please do not rank them, because the possibility of you getting ranked with them is still there. Once they're on the list, there is a chance that you can still be ranked. So it's an algorithm, you'll see YouTube videos all about it, but the algorithm is there, and once they're on the list, they are fair game to be matched with. So just to keep that in mind as well.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, I actually met a resident who told me from her experience that she emailed multiple programs saying that she ranked them first. And she ran into one of the PDs at a conference, and they were talking about it, and she said, oh, yeah, I saw you also ranked this person first. So just curious how you ranked both of us first. So I actually met a resident who told me that that happened. So yeah, they do talk. So just definitely keep that in mind. So that's definitely a good point. And what are just some common mistakes, common red flags, common things to avoid? And I think especially as an IMG, what are some common things to be careful of, when it comes to interviews?
So I think uh one other thing I wanted, sorry, to bring up about other than a pitfall to avoid is that residents do have a lot of say. And so if you really mesh well with a resident during an interview, they usually will give you all of their emails. It's okay to email them too, because if you have a good relationship there, like for us in my residency program, like we would sit down and go through every single applicant and they would take the resident feedback on all the applicants. So don't forget that piece too. If you know someone at a program that's a resident there, reach out, because that's another advocate in your name. So they have more say than you think, and you don't realize that till you get there and you're on the other side. But as for pitfalls to avoid, I agree. I think being too casual is kind of a turnoff. Like, this is a professional interview. They're looking to see can you be professional? Not only in the interview setting, but like also in very stressful situations. And like as physicians, this is a requirement of us throughout when people are yelling at you, when things are not going right, when chaos is happening. And so in this situation, there's like no reason not to be professional. So don't be too casual. With residents, I think you can have like a little bit more of like more of a casual conversation, but you still need to be on because they are judging everything. What you're, those things. And so they can glean anything from what you're saying. I agree, like sounding too rehearsed. This just goes back to just being genuine and being true to yourself. Um, and then I think when you talk about like misaligning values, I think if you do your research on a program, you can avoid that pitfall as well. So I think just all the things we talked about, be yourself, act interested because you most likely are, and do your research. And honestly, you guys will all do fantastic, and the interviews will come. So I think this is a very exciting time for everybody. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, once again, to like piggyback, like, yes, being too casual. I can say for myself, I don't think I had a situation in particular with where being too casual. I think it is also important that, yes, the program might be like in terms of a little more informal, which is understandable. You're trying to get in, you're on the opposite side, but always making sure to never forget that part. So, you're able to like laugh if they say something or, make a smile. You don't want to be stiff and just be like, and just only your eyes move. That's like strange. Like, it's okay to do a balance using your hands. I know I'm somebody, I use my hands when I'm expressing myself, things of that nature when it's important. I think that's very important as well. Sounding once again, like I said, to rehearse, and this is we're doing like mock interviews with either like residents that you know from another program, mock interviews. I hope the Houston family medicine residents are doing that again because that was definitely helpful as well to kind of take away those jitters and feeling like you have to have that script. Of course, you it's great to have some form of like a elevator pitch per se about like why you're going into the specialty and things like that, but you don't want to seem too monotonous where you're not able to just flow. It's supposed to flow like a casual, you're just having a conversation. And at the same time, like I said, they're interviewing you. You are also interviewing them as well. And once again, yes, like researching your program, you're going to pick up very quickly if the values do not align. And then the interview is basically to see, do I truly align or do I not? I remember there was a program that I was interested in, my second interview into the season. I was like, wow, I love that program. And actually, to add on to that, especially for those who do virtual, these second looks, you'll probably hear this term thrown out. The second looks, I will champion for that. If that is anything I champion for, second looks, especially for the virtual. Number one, it gives you a chance to see the program, see the campus, see the residents, kind of get the feel for the area. I think those things are important. You remember you're going to be probably moving across the country, doing some form of relocation to go to this program for an extensive amount of time. This could be the place you spend the rest of your life and practice. So I think it's important that wherever you can, like I said, have that control and be able to see different aspects of the program from different angles, it does help and it can change your rank list. I know it did for me, and I'm so glad I did the second looks that I could. I know, yes, you may not be able to do all, but I would say maybe your top three or your top five that you're kind of toying or fighting with. I would definitely recommend that as well. And also, if it's misalignment and you realize, you know what? I'm not really crazy about this program. You can choose to rank them lower or
Mhm.
not rank them at all, depending on how many interviews you have and take your chances with that. But I think most importantly, like I said, staying true to yourself, your goals, your short-term goals in residency, and also your long-term goals, especially leading into your career, is important as well. But definitely second looks.
And I think my philosophy has been I throughout this entire process, even like for med school, I feel like you truly end up like where you're supposed to be. So, like I said, I know it's a very stressful time, but even now and then after ranking, and then if you maybe didn't get your first choice or places that you thought were going to be the best opportunity for you, I've had people who really are just beyond happy with where they ended up. And I truly believe that the situation just really works out in the best possible way. So just knowing that your program is out there and you guys will find each other.
I agree. It does sound corny, but it's true. I also matched at my number one as well. But those who matched at that, like I know who matched at their number two and three are in love. And like there was like, man, I probably would have went back and ranked it number one if I had known this. So it's going to work itself out. Just breathe, remain calm, take care of your mental health, do what you need to do, enjoy this time because once residency starts, it literally you're in it. and there's no turning back. So, but it's a great time. So don't let us, scare you. But yeah, it's a great time. So enjoy your fourth there. Take it all in.
Sweet, thank you. We're just about approaching the hour mark, so I'll just kind of give it up to anybody. If anyone does have questions, feel free to toss it in the chat or go ahead and unmute your mic and just feel free to ask it. I'll give people a sec to do that.
Hi, sorry I joined late. It's Laffoon.
Hey, Dr. Laffoon, how you doing?
Better now. Sorry for the
Yeah.
delay.
Good to have
Allie,
you.
Allie, while we're waiting for people to ask questions, could you talk a little bit about your interview process? Did anyone like pimp you during your interviews or just more so trying to get to know you and your experience? Because neither one of us had that experience, but I didn't know, and I have maybe heard that in surgery that may happen. So we thought you'd be a good person to ask.
Yeah, so I did get a few questions in surgery interviews. And I think it wasn't so much to really and truly assess my knowledge base. I think it was just to see how I would act under pressure. And a lot of them weren't like basic anatomy. It was like, you get this patient, what would you do kind of thing. Um, I guess I did get a couple like basic anatomy things, but that was usually the older generation that was asking those kinds of things. But that only happened once or twice. I think the majority of it is like decision making and thought process, and just to see kind of how you act in an uncertain situation when you're not really expecting that. So really, I think the biggest thing is stay calm and then stress the communication that you would do and things that you would, when you would go up the chain. That's genuinely what they want to know.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard just with like any question, a big thing they look for is like your ability to kind of explain your thought process. So it seems like that's important.
Yeah, they really just want to see that you're not crazy and they want to see that you stay calm in weird situations, because that's going to be residency, is kind of getting comfortable in the uncomfortable.
For sure. Eduardo, you have a question?
How you mentioned some timelines about when you received interviews. So you got them as early as the next day, and how late did you get them?
So I received interviews as late as mid-January, actually. And I was actually shocked. Like I woke up and I was like, wait, like I didn't expect to receive, but yeah, up until like mid-January. Some interviews I remember going as at least into like Valentine's Day, earlier this year for me as well. So I remember that. So it all depends, honestly, specialty dependent as well.
Surgery is usually really late. I didn't get my first interview until like mid-October, Halloween-ish. And then my last interview was Super Bowl Sunday.
Cool.
So that's like the first or second weekend in February for the non-football people. And that's American football. Sorry, not football.
And I do think, especially now that interviews are virtual, I think scheduling them like a little later is an option. And so if people cancel interviews, that may be an opportunity for them to invite other people. So yeah, I think I got some even like late December, maybe early January. So they're still may be coming.
Cool. Any other questions from anybody else?
I have another one,
Hit us.
specifically for Dr. Valenti. So you're the Peds Onc fellow, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. I'm interested in oncology, and I was wondering if you factored that pathway at all, or you're just like, oh, I just want to get into a residency and then I'll go into the fellowship. Like, how did that affect your application and your ranking?
Yeah. So I think to do oncology, either in adult or peds, you have to start off with either pediatric, med peds, or internal medicine residency. So you have to kind of go into one of those from the beginning. And my interest always was in pediatrics. And so that was a pretty easy and clear cut decision for me. And then I think I went into residency having an interest in peds hemonc. but truly was pretty open to the experience. I had a lot of hematology experience going into residency, but no oncology experience. And so I really used that time to explore that field, get some oncology experience, as well as explore other fields. And I also kind of flirted with the idea of other subspecialties like in there, but then ultimately ended back up at Heme and then applied for fellowship. So I think knowing like what patient population you want to take care of is really helpful. And if you don't know, med peds is always an option. And then really using your residency time to explore all subspecialties, as well as really diving deep into the one that you think you may want to apply to for fellowship is really the best way to do it. And if you flip flop in the middle, that's okay. I think totally normal. You'll figure out which one's like the best fit for you in the end. And I think all of your experiences in your residency rotations will help you figure that out. Like I love the high acuity of ER, but like I was really missing that like continuity of care. And then I got to the ICU and kind of the same thing. So I knew I wanted to do something like that, but have that relationship. And so HEMONC really was a perfect fit in that situation. So just kind of pay attention to those things as you go through your rotations. Even in your third and fourth year, you'll start to realize those things too. And if you
Cool.
ever want to talk further about that, please shoot me an email. We can chat.
Cool. I think a question we have in the chat is obviously nowadays with tech, a lot of information is on websites. So how do you guys like go about curating questions to ask during interviews? Like what are there specific things you guys focus on? Like what kind of is your thought process behind the questions you guys ask?
I know for myself, in terms of coming up with questions, I know I'm interested in doing an OB fellowship actually, after residency. So asking a little bit about like, okay, how do you, it's for someone like myself who's interested in a fellowship. I noticed that's not a part of your program. Have you had residents who were interested in that path? What is the support like? So kind of also using either your interest in terms of like long term, or based on your interviews with other programs, there might have been something that was asked to you or that you realize that you're like, I wonder if this is at this program. So as you're going through interviews, you're also able to kind of gather other information about things that, oh, this is actually a good question. I didn't think about that. Or clarifying something that you saw on the website that might not have been clear as well is also important. And also keeping in mind who you're interviewing with. So something that you would ask a resident, like in terms of taking time off, accessing grocery stores, typical wellness things, I would more lean towards a resident versus PD, where I'm thinking of long-term culture of the program, something difficult that has taken place. That's always sometimes good as well to really understand how do they deal with issues of like diversity or tough topics like that that are happening within the residency program. A resident who's struggling, what resources do you provide for your resident? I thought that was one of the questions I asked as well. Like, how do you deal with residents who are struggling and having issues? What is the support for that? So also having those questions in mind as well is also important too and helpful.
I sort of asked more abstract questions, and also going into surgery, I understood that it was pretty likely I was going to be in a preliminary position. So a few of my questions, mainly geared towards like program directors, like Dr. Jones said, towards like upper level people, not so much residents or fellows, is saying like, how do you help your preliminary residents? What's the success rate of your preliminary residents? Where have they gone? How have they been supported? Like, what are those systems in place? How do they obtain new letters of recommendation? How are they more competitive than other preliminary residents? And then other things that I asked again to like leadership, because the residents, like Dr. Jones said, you can ask like wellness questions, like, how is living there? How is like life, whatever. But for program directors and upper level, attendings, I would ask things that wouldn't be on the website, like, what changes do you foresee in the next 5 years? Because general surgery is a 5-year program. Where do you see the program going in 5 years? What do you see as like weaknesses of the program, and how are you working to enhance that? Similar questions to like what they'll ask you, kind of turn it back on them and say, how is the program going to grow in the next 5 years, and how can I be a part of that? Another thing I asked was, how does a resident be successful in your program? What are attributes that you're looking for? And I usually ask that towards the end so they don't think I'm trying to cheat. But just to like try to get a gauge of like what kind of style they are used to teaching. And if that's not your vibe, then it may not be as good of a fit as maybe you think. So hearing from program directors and high level attendings kind of what kind of person is successful in their program can be really helpful as well. And those are things that just won't be on the website because they can't be. So just try to think of abstract things like that that are important to you that you can ask, because it'll show that you're insightful and really thinking about your future and how you fit into what they're doing and how they're changing.
I
I
have one
agree. I think
question.
those are excellent. Go ahead. You have another question?
Yes, if I may. I don't know if you, I don't know how recent is the signaling a program, but I want to know if you receive response from the programs that you signal, and also how long did the program that you ended up with took to ask you for an interview?
We did not have signaling, so that is a newer thing. So we'll let Dr. Jones answer that. I feel like the program I matched at, like it was kind of probably like right in the middle to get an interview. So I don't think that that really has a whole lot of bearing because again, I feel like the interview really is just your foot in the door, and the interview really is kind of the time to really shine and see if it's a good fit between the two. But if you want to talk about the signaling process.
I didn't have signaling, but mine was the very last interview that I had on Super Bowl Sunday.
So for myself, yeah, so like Dr. Valenti and Dr. Laffoon said, like in terms of the interview, like waiting how long, it honestly all depends. I've heard stories where it goes like in waves. They'll do like a first wave from like, since the applications got released till maybe like end of October, and then you'll kind of see a second wave of interviews coming in. I think that kind of happened for me just last year as well. For the signaling, I think so. It's more of just trying to kind of like gauge, like saying, I really would like an interview, not necessarily like I really want to go to your and of course like you're interested in the program, but I think it's more so trying to gauge them to say, yes, I really would like an interview. And I know the signaling is a specialty dependent. I know for me it was 5 in family. I think it was also 5 in peds.
Yeah,
I
it
believe,
was
yeah.
5 in EM,
IMs,
15 in
15,
IM,
15 in IM, gold,
15 in
silver.
anesthesia.
Yeah, so I think it's also specialty dependent. But for the signaling, so I remember from my program, I didn't get my interview. So actually, number one, I will state they were not a program I signaled. Two, I didn't receive that interview until probably somewhere in November, like mid-November prior to Thanksgiving. And I think also something to keep in mind that even though you do the signals and you hope for the interviews, it doesn't necessarily happen that way. I had 5 and I got interviews from 2 of my signals, and it totally worked out. I'm right where I need to be. It was my number one. But also to keep in mind the geographical preferences as well. So it's a whole like algorithm. So it's like the signaling, then the geographical preferences, and my I guess take on the geographical preferences. I think it does help. Like, yes, if you say no, it looks like you would be amenable and go anywhere. But I think it's also nice for programs as well, that they can see that you are basically open to being in a particular region. And that's helpful because programs also want to be able to retain residents. A lot of times you'd be surprised where you graduate from residency and they're like, yeah, we have a spot opening up. Is this something that you may be interested in, especially if you want to go into academic medicine? I know for myself, as I went through the interview process and thinking about like long term, I think academic medicine is something that I would like to go into. I love teaching. I love that. For me, I want to be able to do OB, and especially as an FM doc, I want to do a little bit of everything. So I can basically do that through academic medicine. So I think that's one of the things to keep in mind as well. In the end, it wasn't my geographic preference. And then for like location, I basically left that kind of like open. I think the region was more important for me than urban, suburban, rural. it didn't necessarily matter to me in that regard, but I felt like the geographical location definitely helped because a lot of my programs I did get from regions, especially given the fact I'm from New York, but I matched in Indiana. But it's all about how you sell yourself in terms of, oh yeah, like this is a region that I have friends in the area where I have support that they love to see that you have some form of a support system, especially as an intern is infamously known as one of the toughest years. Not to say all the years don't get hard, but especially that intern year where you're in that transition, it's so important that you're able to show you have a support system to help guide you through that process as well. So yeah, that's my take in terms of the signaling. But yes, maximize your signals.
Sweet. And I think the last question we'll take, and I think I'll direct this to Dr. Laffoon, is it appropriate to ask like PDs and just your interviews about like their hobbies, their interests, like more casual things like that, or is that kind of just, not appropriate and that's something you should avoid?
It's a really good question. And I think, I guess the fact that I'm questioning it this much should maybe make everyone realize that probably not. I think if it's something that's this like questionable, I would just steer clear of it. You don't want to be remembered as like that girl or guy, sorry. And I think also for the women, it's a little bit different. And I hate to go this route, but I will say, especially in surgery, um, and probably other programs and other specialties, but it's kind of an old boys club. And if you start going into an interview with an older gentleman as a young woman, being like, "What are your interests? What are your hobbies?" It can be
That,
yeah, it's
yeah.
just flirting with danger and flirting in general, and I think that's how it would come off. And I hate to put it back into such like archaic terms, but I think given the people that I know in the positions that they're in, I would probably steer clear of it. If it comes up and they ask you like about hobbies that you list on your thing, you can be like, "Oh, why did you ask? Do you have an interest in that?" I think if it comes up naturally in that kind of sense, then it's totally reasonable to talk about, similar hobbies and similar interests, shared interests. That's a totally different question, but in the point of the interview where they end and they say, "So, do you have any questions?" and you come back with, "So, what are your hobbies?" I think it sounds a little Valley Girl. Um, so I would say probably not.
Okay,
That would be
cool.
a resident question.
Cool. All right, I think we'll kind of like wrap up there. I'm gonna again huge shout out. Thank you, Dr. Valenti, Dr. Laffoon, and Dr. Jones for joining in. I know you all are very busy. So again, super, super appreciated. On the SGA side, again, thank you guys so much for hosting it. For everyone who knows the carnival is postponed and also stay safe. There's a big hurricane coming through as well. Uh, and then in terms of the Alumni Association, so Dr. Laffoon and Dr. Valenti are both co-presidents of the Alumni Association, something that's been kind of started up over the past couple semesters. And also a big shout out to Faluk, who's been a huge part of getting that set up. And I know they have a bunch of stuff planned and a bunch of resources coming your way. I don't know if you guys have any comments or anything you guys wanted to mention about it. I'll
Yeah,
turn.
just that Allie and I, along with I think an excellent group of executive board members are really working to get things off the ground. And so we are working on establishing a mentorship program between alumni and students. So look out for emails from that. And then when you guys all match next year, be sure to join the Alumni Association. So then you guys can turn around and give back to the Trinity students that are coming behind you. And I feel like as a Trinity graduate, I think some of the best things I have done is really connect with students and kind of give back to the school. And it's been very rewarding. So keep that in mind in the future. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Sweet. Yeah, I've gotten the pleasure to watch them two and Faluk kind of navigate this, and it's been they're putting in a lot of work. So I'm super excited about it personally. So again, thank you both, and also thank you, Dr. Jones. And then yeah, I mean, in terms of practitioner, thank you guys all for attending. Really appreciate it. One of our early events that we're doing with the school. Something on our end we've done is we've kind of created a bit of a guide to kind of hopefully help with interview prep. It's just a free guide with a few different sessions on like different things that come up during interviews. And me and three of my buddies have been testing it for the past month, and we've literally just hang out and like talk about these questions. And it's helped me kind of figure out like what I want to talk about in interviews and also discover things about myself a little bit too, which is kind of corny, but true. So hit the link in our bio and also give that a check. But again, thank you all for coming. Super appreciated it. And thank you to our speaker panel as well. But yeah, I'll let you all get on with your evenings. I know it's getting kind of late, but thanks once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care,
I can
everyone.
also put my email for those who are wanting to reach out as well, just to like follow up. I'm more than happy to. So I'll drop that in the chat. But thank you again.
Sweet. I'll also send it out in a post email as well too for
Oh,
anyone
perfect.
Perfect.
for